Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we've got something a bit different. Not geopolitics, not, hard science, but something equally fundamental, I think.
Absolutely. We're looking at language itself, specifically a set of 5 motivational idioms. They all fall under this umbrella theme of do your best.
Right. Effort, determination, perseverance, things we all grapple with.
Exactly. And our goal here isn't just to, define these phrases. We want to dig into the context, the sort of cultural weight they carry.
Get behind the dictionary meaning.
Yeah. Understand when and why you'd actually use them. It's almost like mapping out the stages of trying hard at something, from starting to facing pushback to dealing with success or, well, the lack of it sometimes.
I like that stages of effort. Okay, so if we're mapping it, the very first stage has to be just starting, taking that first step.
Makes sense. You can't persevere if you haven't begun.
So let's kick off our dive right there with Idiom 81, get the ball rolling.
Okay, so this one, on the surface, it's pretty straightforward. It means start something, initiate action, get the process going.
Simple enough.
But the real interest here is the psychology behind it. It's often about overcoming inertia, right? That feeling of being stuck before you start.
Yeah, and the source material has this great little dialogue about fixing a roof. Someone says, "You've been talking about repairing the roof for weeks now. Don't you think it's about time to get the ball rolling?"
That really highlights it. The idiom comes up not usually because the task is super complex, but because someone's dragging your feet. Procrastination.
It's a nudge, or maybe more than a nudge sometimes.
It can be. It's a call to move from just thinking about it to actually doing it. Planning to execution.
And the example adds this layer of urgency that I think is crucial. The reason to start now is because, according to the weather report, it's supposed to rain tomorrow.
Exactly. That context changes everything. Suddenly, it's not just a casual, hey, let's start this. It's, we need to start this immediately or face real consequences.
A leaky roof in this case.
Right. So it shows that getting the ball rolling isn't just about the initial push, but also about timing. Recognizing that window of opportunity, or maybe the window before disaster strikes.
That's a great point. So you could use it in a meeting, like, okay, team, let's get the ball rolling on the Q3 projections.
Sure. Or even more casually, who wants to get the ball rolling with ideas for the party theme? Just to break the silence and start the brainstorming.
Okay, so that's the starting point. But once that ball is rolling, well, things aren't always smooth, are they? You hit obstacles, you face resistance.
Inevitably. Which brings us perfectly to our next idiom, number 80, stick to one's guns.
Ah, yes. This one feels very resolute. It's about holding firm, right? Maintaining your position or your opinion, even when people are pushing back hard.
That's the core of it. Conviction, determination.
Yeah.
But like you said, there's pushback involved. This isn't about easy agreement.
And the phrase itself, sticking to your guns, it sounds almost military.
Well, that's likely where it comes from. The image is probably literal, a soldier refusing to abandon their artillery post, their guns, under fire. It implies serious pressure and a refusal to yield.
Okay, so discipline and conviction, how does that play out in the example? There's a club chairman.
Right. So this chairman wanted to invite a controversial speaker. The members were really against it. They think it's, quote, inadvisable. Lots of pressure on him to cancel.
But he doesn't. He sticks to his guns.
He does. And the crucial part is why. It wasn't necessarily because he loved the speaker's views. His conviction was about the process. He insisted they needed to hear the other side of the question before taking a vote on the issue.
Ah, okay. So his principle was about informed decision-making, about hearing all sides, even the uncomfortable ones.
Exactly. It wasn't just stubbornness for its own sake. It was sticking to a principle he believed was essential for the group, even if it was unpopular. That elevates it beyond just ego,
That's a really key distinction. It's holding firm when a core belief or an ethical line or maybe a necessary procedure is being challenged.
Precisely. And connecting it back to doing your best, it suggests that real achievement often involves navigating these tough spots, these disagreements, and not backing down when your fundamental reasoning is sound. You started the ball rolling, now you have to steer through the rough patches.
Which is why it's often used as encouragement, right? Like, stick to your guns on your data is solid.
Definitely. Or looking back, she really stuck to her guns during those negotiations, and that's why the team kept its independence. It celebrates that resilience.
Resilience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that kind of fight, sticking to your guns, it often takes time. It's not usually a quick win. It requires staying power.
Which leads us nicely into the next phase, the endurance phase. Idiom 83. hang on.
This one feels heavier. Like, it implies difficulty, maybe even desperation sometimes.
I think so. Hang on means persevere, keep going, don't quit, specifically when things are really tough. It's about enduring hardship.
And the source gives this really powerful historical example that the Smiths and their business during the Great Depression.
Yeah, just pause and think about that context for a second. Widespread economic collapse.
Yeah.
Businesses failing everywhere. Uncertainty day after day.
Trying to keep a store afloat in that environment,
Yeah.
unimaginable.
And the text says they were able to hang on,
Hmm.
and they managed to persevere until things got better. That simple phrase, hang on, it covers potentially years of struggle, of anxiety, of just refusing to give up.
It suggests that sometimes the action is simply continuing to exist, right?
Right.
It's not necessarily about making big moves, but about outlasting the storm, like strategic patience.
That's a great way to put it. Strategic patience. It's active determination on the inside, even if it looks passive on the outside. And the implication is that survival itself is the key.
Wow.
By hanging on, the Smiths were still there when the economy eventually turned. They were positioned to recover because they endured.
So sometimes the best thing you can do, your best effort, is just not quitting, holding
Yeah.
on.
It validates that idea. Sometimes just surviving is succeeding, at least for that phase.
Which makes me think, for you listening, when things feel tough, is it an I need to get the ball rolling problem, like inertia? Or is it an I need to hang on problem, like exhaustion?
Knowing the difference is key, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because they need different kinds of fuel. Hang on is often about shared struggle, that camaraderie. Hang on, this project deadline is almost here.
Or that quiet reassurance, just hang on a little longer, things will eventually look up. It's about sustaining effort when maybe that fierce conviction of sticking to your guns feels too draining.
Okay, so we've started, we've stood firm, we've endured. But all this effort usually happens around other people, right?
Yeah.
You're rarely doing something significant completely alone.
True, which means you need some social awareness, some diplomacy.
Exactly. Which brings us to idiom 82, mind one's P's and Q's.
This one always sounded a bit old-fashioned to me, like something my grandmother would say. It means be careful, right? Be polite, proper, watch your behavior.
That's the gist of it. Be on your best behavior. Pay close attention to what you say and do. High social alertness.
Where does P's and Q's even come from? It sounds so specific.
Well, the origin isn't definitively known. There are a few theories, but a couple are really interesting. One relates to old-style printing presses.
Printing, how so?
With movable type, the actual metal letters for lowercase p and q are mirror images. They look very similar, especially reversed. So apprentice typesetters had to be really careful. They had to mind their p's and q's to avoid mixing them up in the type case, which would obviously mess up the printed text.
Oh, I like that. Precision under pressure.
Right. Another popular theory is about pubs, taverns. Bartenders supposedly kept track of customers' tabs by marking P for pints and Q for quarts on a slate. So both the bartender and the patron needed to mind their P's and Q's to make sure the bill was right.
Huh. Okay, so whether it's printing or pints, the core idea is carefulness, attention to detail in a situation where mistakes matter.
Exactly. And the example in our source shows just how high the social stakes can be. We've got Larry invited to Clarissa's party.
Right. And he gets this specific warning. He needs to mind his P's and Q's when he's around another guest, Susan.
And the reason is, well, it's about perception and potential drama. Clarissa, the host, is apparently the jealous type.
Ah. So if Larry is too casual or familiar with Susan, Clarissa might assume something is going on between the two of you.
And boom, no more party invitations for Larry. His whole social standing at that party depends on him being careful, being proper, reading the room.
Wow. Okay, so doing your best here isn't about task competence. It's about navigating social minefields, managing how you're perceived.
It absolutely is. It shows that all your hard work, your endurance, your brilliant ideas,
Wow.
they can all be derailed by one clumsy social misstep, one moment where you weren't minding your P's and Q's.
So it applies way beyond just formal dinners, meeting crucial clients, interacting with a sensitive boss.
Any situation where careful conduct is required. Remember to mind your P's and Q's during the interview. First impressions count. It's about situational awareness and self-control.
Okay, so let's say you navigate all that. You get the ball rolling, you stick to your guns through opposition, you hang on during the tough times, and you manage the social stuff by minding your P's and Q's. You achieve success.
Hopefully. Which brings us to the final stage, and maybe the most awkward one. Idiom 79, toot one's own horn.
Yeah, the ego stage, as I called it earlier. This means bragging, right? Boasting about what you've achieved. And it definitely has a negative feel to it, usually.
It generally does, yes. It implies excessive self-praise. It's interesting, though, the phrase likely started literally. Important people, like medieval heralds announcing nobility, would actually have a horn or trumpet sounded to announce their arrival or status.
So it was once just a signal, an expected announcement.
Pretty much. But over time, it's flipped. Now, doing it for yourself, tooting your own horn, suggests you're maybe inflating your importance, self-aggrandizement.
That shift itself says a lot about our cultural feelings, about humility versus self-promotion. We're told, let your work speak for itself, but sometimes you have to mention your achievements.
It's a real tension. But the source material offers a really elegant way to think about it, using the example of Michael, the novelist.
Right. His last book was a bestseller.
And the observation is that because it was such a clear success, he had no need to toot his own horn. Why not? Because other people, readers, critics, were already doing it for him. The praise was external.
Ah, that's the key insight. Genuine, undeniable success often creates its own buzz. If the achievement is strong enough, you don't need to boast because the results are evident.
It ties the whole journey together. If you truly did the work, got rolling, stuck to it, endured, navigated carefully the outcome, ideally, speaks volumes. Tooting your own horn in that light can almost signal insecurity, like maybe the work doesn't quite stand on its own.
That makes a lot of sense. Although sometimes you do have to report your successes, maybe in a job review or something. We often soften it, don't we? Like, I don't mean to toot my own horn, but I did close that big account.
Exactly. We apologize for it. Or, on the flip side, we use the idiom to call someone out. Okay, stop tooting your own horn now. Let's see the actual numbers. It forces that check between self-perception and external reality.
What a journey. Okay, let's quickly recap these 5 phases of doing your best that we've sort of mapped out.
That was good. We started with initiation, captured by get the ball rolling. That need to just begin, often with some urgency.
Then came conviction. That's stick to one's guns, holding firm to principles when facing opposition.
Followed by endurance, which was, the sheer grit to persevere through difficult times, waiting for things to improve.
Then we had external awareness, or maybe diplomacy, mind one's P's and Q's, being careful and attentive in social or high-stakes situations.
And finally, the consequence, or maybe the aftermath phase, with toot one's own horn, which questions how we talk about our success once it's achieved.
It really does cover a lot of ground, which leaves us with a final thought, something for you, the listener, to maybe chew on regarding your own efforts.
We've seen this interplay between conviction, diplomacy, ego.
Right. So think about a project or a challenge you face. Where is that line between sticking to your guns, which feels necessary and principled, and just tooting your own horn, which feels, well, boastful and maybe unnecessary?
Is the difference in the principle itself? Or is it just about whether you succeeded in the end? What makes conviction valid versus just ego?
Does your internal belief matter more, or does the external validation, the applause, or lack thereof ultimately define it? Something to mull over.